Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. It's hosted by KaiNexus, and it's titled Impactful Methods to Benefit Organizational Knowledge Management and Continuous Improvement Efforts. I'm Mark Rabin, a senior advisor with KaiNexus. I'll be the host and moderator today. And we're really thrilled to be joined by our presenter, Dr. Cynthia J. Young. I'll tell you more about Cindy in a minute, and we'll make sure we share links to her website and social media and places you can find her online after the session. So Dr. Cindy Young is the founder and CEO of CJ Young Consulting, LLC, a knowledge management consulting firm. And she's also a curriculum developer and instructor with the company Leidos. After about a decade ago, Cindy retired as a surface warfare officer after 23 years in the US Navy, which is where her love for knowledge management began. Cindy holds professional certifications as a project management professional, a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt, and as an ASQ certified manager of quality and organizational excellence. Her doctoral study, titled Knowledge Management and Innovation on Firm Performance of United States Ship Repair, provided Cindy the opportunity to gain additional professional and academic expertise to facilitate improvements in organizational knowledge management. And you can also go find online Cindy's TEDx talk, September 2020. She gave a talk titled A Knowledge Mindset, What to Know Comes from Where You Sit. And that provides actions that organizations can take to improve trust and retention through use of knowledge management practices. So Cindy is both a continuous improvement expert, a knowledge management expert. So she's the perfect person to talk to us today about this topic. And I also want to acknowledge and say hi to Buddy the cat, who is enjoying the sun in the window. So yeah, Buddy was there when Cindy and I did a podcast recently, and Buddy's going to be chill and not get in the way. So Cindy, let me turn things over to you. Thanks again for presenting today.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate you having me. I know that sounds pretty cheesy, but I really do. For those of you I don't know, I have followed Mark on LinkedIn for a couple of years. I have friends that know him, and so it's really fun for me to actually be here and present with KaiNexus, and also doing the podcast with them. So I'm just really excited about sharing knowledge management. I've loved it since I was in the military and before I even knew it was called knowledge management. I think it is so important for organizations to embrace it because it's really what you use to share knowledge with everybody else. And I'm going to talk specifically about human-centric knowledge management, not computers, not robotic process automation, not anything that you need Trons to do. You can do these like we do continuous improvement projects with Post-its, with pen and paper, and brainstorming. So, the presentation, is a mouthful. I've never been good with keeping titles short. So, it's no surprise this one's pretty long, especially when you got knowledge management, continuous improvement. It's 4 words already. But so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a bunch of slides. We're going to talk about what, different methods, as well as some tools that are in there that you can use that you don't have to learn what they do. I'm just going to talk to you about how you use them in with knowledge management and in knowledge management to support your continuous improvement efforts, because it's so important that we don't want to spend extra time and extra money to get somebody to be able to do something better. We want to be able to work with what we have and then move on from there once we've come to a solution or a proposed solution. All right, so these are our objectives, and like I said, I want to talk to you about most useful common methods available in knowledge management. And so there are no knowledge management methods specifically. These are all methods you've seen elsewhere. And we're going to talk about how they work in process improvement, in quality, and project management, just overall problem solving, because knowledge management should make you a better problem solver because you're integrating with other teams, other people, and sharing what you know and learning what they know. And then finally, we're going to talk about how these can support standardization, because why have 10 different processes when you can standardize a process and make it work? So we're going to talk about that. So these are some of the most common and useful methods to support knowledge management. And I'm not going to read the list to you, but I will point out a couple. And let me first tell you, knowledge management in my world, because there's over 100 definitions of knowledge management. The way I use knowledge management is it's what you do with the information from what you have, what other people have, or what the systems that you use tell you. And knowing what to do with that is what makes it powerful and how you can use for problem solving, as well as all the other things I was talking about: project management, standardization, process improvement. So you'll see everything in here is probably very common to what you use on a daily basis. I will say battle rhythm is something that I gained when I was in the military. We use these, it just means in order that you do things, in order that you have meetings so that you can come with solutions rather than problems to newer meetings or give updates. And then the other one that I really enjoy is in the mapping, is mind mapping. And I will talk more about that. It's my favorite thing to do. And I've used Post-its to do that as well. But you can use stuff that's already in your computer. Visio and PowerPoint, you can both use those. So let's get started. And we're going to go through each one of these. And I have a couple things at the end. They're not really bonus material, but they're just extras I thought about. So, we use checklists and check sheets all the time. And, for those who may be new to process improvement, checklists and check sheets are two different things. And I will tell you, when I first started out with ASQ, um, I was in ASQ since about 2010, and I used to mix these up all the time, checklists and check sheets. To me, it was all just a way to keep track of things. But checklists, they're a way of supporting doing things. And so I use them to not forget things. That's why I put grocery list and packing list, because those are two types of list I use more than anything else. If I don't have a grocery list on my phone, I forget to buy something. And same thing with packing. I end up having to go to a store somewhere else. And like I was telling Mark before we started, is I'm going to London. So I've already started my packing list to go to London, including my passport and my ID and my extra wallet, because you got to be safe, when traveling anywhere, especially when you travel on a plane. There's just all sorts of things. So the packing list and the grocery list are good checklists. But check sheets, we used to use these all the time when we're doing oil readings to figure out what type of temperatures we have. Because we use those for observations, and you want to document your results. So if you think about it, if you go shopping and go shopping, my favorite place in the world, which is Target. You go in there in the bathroom and they have a check sheet where you walk in, and so what the restroom cleaning time is. And the reason this is important, and you'll see this on the sides, is that it's important because it provides a forceful backup for processes. And what I mean by that is it gives you backup. Oh, well, what were you doing? And did you do this? Well, yeah, here it is on my checklist or on my check sheet. I did this. And oh, did you remember this? Yes, I remembered it. I checked it off my checklist. And that's just simple knowledge management, is being able to show somebody, yes, this is where you can go to acquire whether or not this was done, without having to track somebody down. It makes it where it's a little more flexible in your workspace. Because if you have a checklist on how to do something, or to not forget to do something, or you have a check sheet on a process, this is going to enable you to share knowledge without having to get up and go find somebody. You can just go to it. And if you keep it on a computer somewhere, that's fine. But piece of paper stuck to a door, that's okay too. So I'm going to go to the next one. Lessons learned. I'm sorry, I got to move this. I'm sharing it, so I have a hard time seeing some of my titles. So, reporting and lesson learned after action reviews. If you haven't done a lessons learned review before you start a project, I submit that you're doing it wrong. I think that you need to review all lessons learned prior to doing it. It's not just about writing them up afterwards. Because if you were to start a project and somebody else is already doing the same project, well, you're not learning anything before you start. You're relearning your lesson at the end. And so if you create a report or a lesson learned, then these are great. But if you post them on a SharePoint portal, they're not going to do any good. What you have to do is you have to make sure other people are aware of them. So when we start projects, part of what we do, not at CJ Young Consulting, but at my company, the company I work for, we get people to say, hey, what were the problems you had before? When you taught this student, what kind of feedback did you get? And so we all look at that as, not taking up a lot of time, but prevent ourselves from having to redo work later. And so when you're sharing this knowledge of what happened and what the customer wanted, because that's really what it gets down to is the customer's feedback, is that it helps you to make stuff better later. And so if you do these before you start a project rather than after, when you're just reporting rather than saying, okay, what can bite me, then it's going to save you a lot of time, and it's going to cut down on your rework. And eventually it might make your process really short because you've gotten all these lessons learned and it's really working for you. Now, as for after action reviews, those are a little bit different than lessons learned. So we would have a lessons learned review and then after action reviews. And people are like, aren't they the same thing? Like, no. An after action review is when you get together and you go over, your costs and what things were problems so you can report them up the chain. You're not reporting them to somebody who's working on a similar project. A lot of times we find that these are more senior led meetings and you're briefing seniors. You're not necessarily briefing somebody who's going to put to use the knowledge that you have. So, again, they provide forceful backup. And forceful backup, I apologize for anybody who doesn't understand what that is, but to me, that's making sure that you have a buddy that backs you up, or you have something in place to back you up. That if you're not there, somebody else has heard it before. So in 2 weeks, if you go to do a project, you could remember me saying it, or you can remember somebody else saying, "Well, hey, we had this problem," and you can have that solution ready to go. It's so mapping. Okay. So these types of maps, I love mapping. And like I said, I love mind mapping the most, but we have process mapping, knowledge mapping, and mind mapping. And they're all three different things. So you can see here, process mapping shows how something's done. It documents the processes. And so when you have a standard business process management system, you may have processes written out, how you set your travel up, what you have to do to onboard somebody, how you request financing for tuition assistance. Those are all process maps you may see drawn out because reading a page is a little bit overwhelming sometimes. Knowledge mapping shows relationships between people. And I have an example on the next slide that shows, if you have a organizational structure, or if you have a team and you build it, this is who I report to, this is who somebody else reports to, and this is how we interact in between. That's knowledge mapping. And then mind mapping, this is a great way to illustrate how brainstorming works. We use affinity charts sometimes for brainstorming, but mind mapping I think is a lot more fun actually than any other type of mapping. So just know that it's visual reference. You can use there's really no rules set for mind mapping, quite honestly, other than start in the middle with an object or with a idea or customer, and then branch on out. And I'll talk to you about why they're branches in a second. So these are, three types. I just put the red dotted lines. The information there is not really that important, but what it is that you have three types of maps here. The process map. Everybody on this call is probably familiar with this. We do process maps. We have to do swim lanes. And so these processes, start to finish, and then all the decisions you have to make in between to get to the finish. And so when you drop a process map, this helps you to understand the process better, and you can gain knowledge from other people as you're building it, saying, well, what kind of decisions would they have to make in order to make this happen? Because normally people drafting it up at the final stages are the same people that are conducting the process. And then knowledge mapping. This is an example of a project team. It's very simple, who you have in there and where you fit in there. And so you want to put where you fit in there just so that you know what your relationship is with the other shifts in this. And so all this is doing is just showing you, where you fit in the big scheme. So a knowledge map, it becomes a knowledge map when you can pair, what people do. So if you're looking at the mid shift and you see team member one, you can say, oh, okay, I got to go find out what they do. And you find out, well, they're the expert at doing this on their shift. And then you find out everybody who's number one is the expert on that team. And then the team leads, they all have responsibilities. But then you see your counterparts on the other teams, member number two, and you can go ask them, hey, what kind of things do you need? What kind of things do I need to make sure I pass down to you for your shift? And what kind of things do you use to make sure that everything goes well? So as you populate this, you look at the business analyst and logistics POC, and you can put down what they're important, how that relates to what you do. And so all this is important because you can capture knowledge as easily as this for what your team does, and you don't need a whole bunch of pages individually for what people do. Now, finally, mind mapping, which I'll say again is my favorite because you can do any design you want. I just took a screenshot off the internet for this, and it is, there's a page where it tells you where to go to. Um, later on, but I think it's hidden. But this is real simple mind map, and it branches off, and then each branch has another branch, and that's why you can do it like a tree. And so some of these will look like trees. If you go on the internet and you search mind mapping, you'll see all sorts of different styles of mind mapping. Some have curves, some have straight lines, some are actual trees. But what's important is that you start off with a single object. In this case, it's animal. And so they're talking about different types of animals. They have mammals, fish, and insects. And then you further branch off into what types of mammals, what types of fish, what types of insects. And so I've used this in business development. You can use this in HR for knowledge, skills, and abilities. You can use this for, if you want to improve on something, uh, you know, just go through your ideas. And this is where you can take your explicit and your tacit knowledge. The explicit knowledge is knowledge that's well codified, it's written. The tacit knowledge is knowledge based on your experience. And so you get people together and everybody's going to have their ideas. And so you can come together and combine these all in a mind map. And you can make it as simple or as complex as you want. And some mind mapping, there's some software out there that allows you to link them together. So you can have one mind map that leads into multiple mind maps. So if you're looking at organization, you can have one for your area of continuous improvement, or you might have one area for knowledge management, and you can join them. But you know, I've seen videos on YouTube where people use these to take notes for a class. So this is why it's my favorite, because you can do anything you want with it. You can also use different colored post-it notes. It's a very easy process to use, and if you want to use a computer, you can use PowerPoint or you can use Microsoft Visio and just go to the brainstorming um, legends, because that's where you'll find your ability to mind map on there. So I really enjoy it. And yeah, I can go on and on and on about mind mapping. Excuse me. So community practice. Community practice is the next thing, and it's all about people who get together who have similar goals and similar interests. So if you have, I don't know, say my sister, she's big into coupon clipping. A community practice of coupon clippers may be people who share the sales and know where to find the best coupons. You in your organization, you may have communities of practice, but you may not know that they're called communities of practice because they may be called something else, like a employee research group or employee resource group. That is a type of community practice. There are people who are there to talk about the same kinds of concerns. You may have a mentoring group. You may have I don't know, a veterans group, stuff like that. But you also have other groups. So my last job, when I was a knowledge manager on a contract for a few years, we had different groups of community practice. We had a maintenance one, we had a modernization one, we had a financial one. So we had all these different communities of practice that they shared information with each other and shared knowledge of how they fixed things, what they did to improve something, if they had to have a different process in place, any projects they're working on. Because they all had the same boss in the end. They were all subordinate commands. They had to report to a senior command and make these reports, but they had the same tasks, but just different ships. So community practice they're very valuable because they don't cost a lot of money to do. You just take some time on your work, and so you can have them meet. Like we had them meet twice a month, and so what we had them do is We had an agenda. They came together and they just shared what they knew. They shared what went wrong. They shared what went right. And I just I took minutes. That was part of my job. I took minutes for the meeting, and I would post them, but I would also email them out and then call the individuals if anybody had anything to do. So it all wrapped up into a report at the end of the month. But we also had a lead for the communities of practice. I had a government lead for each of the communities of practice I was supporting because I was supporting two. At one time, I was supporting three. And so these communities of practice, you have to have a government person in charge on these contracts. Just a rule. I didn't make it, but we had communities of practice, and these government people would talk to each other as well. So we had a meeting once a year. And again, that's a bigger community of practice. It's just about talking. And it didn't require any special technology to do so. Just get on a phone call and talk just like we are right now. So these are important again because they give a community or they give an organization a way to share efforts, to share what they're doing and share what problems they're having as well as solutions. We did have one community practice. We actually did a value stream mapping event, and that brought up a lot of knowledge. And so we mapped that out on a value stream, and that worked out pretty well. So it enabled us to move on and make improvements. And the communities of practice are still, according to the person I used to work for, they're still going really well. All right. And Kanban. All right. Kanban, I gave a presentation a few years ago about babies first Kanban because I have friends of mine and I've taught classes in project management and use Kanban in that. And they're like, well, what is Kanban? And I was like, well, it's to do, doing, and done. And they're like, well, what is that really? So I talked about babies first Kanban. And so babies first Kanban is, if you have children, you're probably well aware of putting up a chart and giving your children stars or a check mark or, even a piece of candy or a game for doing a task or doing something really well. And this is just a way of tracking it. So, that seemed pretty easy to explain to somebody. Well, what it does is, you have these different parts of your business that you're doing a process for, and so you're looking at the status of everything. And what it does is it enables people to be able to go to this Kanban and understand what it is that their process is in. Oh, do I need to add more resources to it? And ask questions. Why? How many more friends are you going to invite? Um, what kind of things do I need to do to be able to leave early to take my dog to the vet? And those kind of things, they enable you to ask questions, and then from there you can gain what you need to do to be able to carry on, to be able to go to the next process, and eventually you'll see the status so much that you'll be able to talk to your team and understand what's going on with that, and be able to move it all to the done pile. And in the end, that's really what our bosses care about. You know, are you making progress? Do you need help? Do you need resources? What kind of processes are you using, and when are you going to be done? Because they're going to have other tasking for you. And so, you know, you know, like I said, it's instant. It gives you a status update, and in these words, instant overview of the workflow process. Anyone can understand. If I'm working a project and our IT guys come to ask me what's going on, rather than me having to sit down and explain everything, they can just look at the board and they can see, okay, well, Cindy's at this point in the process. I can't do my updates to her system because she needs to use it, and that's as quickly as the conversation needs to be. I don't need to sit there and give a long drawn out conversation about or a long drawn out explanation about why I need this system. They just know I need it, and they know that it's a good scheduling tool too, because while there's no schedule on there, you can you know using the knowledge that you have on the system, know that I'm going to be on there an hour, I'm going to be on there 2 hours. And so that's why I like Kanban for knowledge management as well, because you don't have to pull somebody aside and pull them away from what they're doing to explain to them what is it you're doing and where your process is stuck or where it's moving. Okay, gamification. And I challenge anybody in here who doesn't know what gamification is. I'm going to ask you, have you been to a Starbucks? Have you been on an airline? Do you make your decision on what airline you fly based on how many miles you get and how many points you get? That's all gamification is. Gamification is using non-games, using gaming ideas to reach an end. So Starbucks, they want to get more customers in, just like any other coffee place, and that's just one I frequent. And they give me stars. And I love double star day because I get more stars for buying something than I do on another day where I only get 2 stars. I'll get 4 stars for $1. And yes, it's ridiculous to spend that much money on coffee, but I do that when I go into the office. And when I get my stars, every 400 stars, I can get a $20 product. So it's even better for me. But that's gamification. Same thing with the airlines. When you're flying on an airline, and I'll choose an airline based on where my flight miles, if I can get a discount on my flights, or if I can upgrade a real for free, I'll do that. And that's all gamification. So, you know, games, like in this example, rewarding users for achievements, leveling up, earning badges. You know, there are some companies that have like their fitness program. If you have a company that has a fitness program, it's great. And you'll get points on my iWatch. I get points for, if I walk a certain amount of steps, I'll get a little badge. And it doesn't do anything for me monetarily, but that gives me a little thumbs up. Hey, I'm doing a great job. So, gamification is really helpful. I did see something yesterday that kind of worries me as I went to fill up my gas tank at 7-Eleven, and they have the little sticker that says, no cell phones, because it can possibly set something on fire, all those rules. But on the right hand side of the gas pump, it has, hey, scan this QR code and get in to get 11 cents off a gallon for the first 7 times you fill up. Yeah, I don't think that's what they meant to do with that, but that's gamification there. They're trying to get your business. So with this, knowledge is shared between employees and teams, because when you're working to make money, if you get a bonus because people buy so much from your store, you're going to push these games. If your team is competing against another team, a sales team, and you say, okay, if I sell so many of these, um, you know, we have a company out here who's selling air handlers, and you get a heat pump or something like that for a big discount, but you have to buy it with it. And that's gamification. It's not very clever, but it's basic gamification. But just know that anything that influences you to buy something because you get a bonus of some sort, that's a gamification area. And I bet you'll remember it, and you'll pass on to your friends that you went to get coffee and you got more points, or you got more stars. Okay, so we're getting the home stretch here. Battle rhythms. Okay, like I said before, battle rhythms are one meeting that supports another meeting. And so in the military, we call them battle rhythms. And I know in the Navy for sure, but I don't know about Marines and Army and Air Force, but I'm pretty certain we all have the same terminology when it comes to supporting meetings. Um, but it doesn't make sense if you go to one meeting and you make a decision and it doesn't support the next guy, then you end up not being able to do what you need to do to support the boss, but you also don't get the responses you need. So I have an example in here of a financial meeting. So, on Tuesday, business analysts, they meet with their project managers to review the spending. And then on Wednesday, the business analysts have to meet with the program managers, who meet with their directors, to talk about what happened at the Tuesday meeting, say where they sit. And then that allows them on Thursday for the project managers and directors to meet with finance. So, the business analysts, they have all the details. So they go to their meetings, and this is just a battle rhythm. So they are passing up to their boss what they have, and it gives their boss time to figure out, okay, maybe this is not working for us. Maybe we need to either slow down how much we're spending, or make things work a lot more smoothly, or get with our people earlier before we say, okay, you can have this extra resource. Because on that Thursday, they're going to have to go to their boss and go to finance with their boss and explain to their boss and finance why they're spending so much money, or why they're needing more money. And just battle rhythms allow you to share the knowledge between the whole decision chain, in order to make it smoother. So, they look at the schedule events. When you're scheduling out every week, we had a weekly team meeting on our ships, and in person. At our company now, we have every month we have a meeting. Every Monday we have a meeting, and then we move it during the week. We'll have meetings with direct reports at our company to make sure that whatever's going on gets down to the people. Not only why what needs to be done, it's why it needs to be done, why it's important, why what's in it for them, why does it affect them, why is it important. So these are the KM methods with special areas. And process improvement. We know knowledge sharing is important. It supports learning opportunities. When we want to make a process better, what do? We talk to people. We don't. If we go into the data, but the data is what creates information. Information is what creates knowledge. And when you have other people that are used to what they're doing and talking to other people, they get a better idea of what the whole process brings, and they can make it better. They can start thinking and think, what can I do? What ifs? What if I do this? Will this make it smoother? Will this make it quicker? Will it make it better? Will it make it worse? And they can go through all that. Project management. We have this thing in project management called the PMBOK guide, and it's just a basic document about the perfect world of project management. It doesn't take into account stakeholders changing their minds as much as it does just giving you a basic rule set to start. And knowledge management is part of the PMBOK guide. I've been fortunate enough to be able to give my feedback, my 2 cents as it is, to the PMBOK the last 2 years, and along with a couple other 100 people. And just so you know, anybody can do it. Anybody can have input in it if they're involved in PMI. And knowledge management, the area has grown. There used to be 10 knowledge areas in project management. Risk, communication, stakeholders. Lessons learned was a big part. But just know knowledge management's in project management formally, just like it is in quality. In ISO 9001 2018, it was the new clause 716. It's only about this big. I think that's about as much, maybe the big, not too big in the text wise, but now organizations, in order to qualify, with their QMS, they have to acknowledge that their knowledge is well, where it's put in place, but people also use it. They have to show that it's accessible and that it's used. It's not just given lip service and put in there. So it affects your ability to get a certification. Now there is an ISO 9001 or ISO 140. I can't remember the number right now. Now that I'm trying to remember it, but it's called Knowledge Management Systems, and it's all about knowledge management. It's not a requirement to be certified in it, but it is part of the ISO family. Now it's 3401. Sorry, 3401 is ISO for this knowledge management systems. And so just know it's not a requirement, it's not a certification requirement, but it does help your teams understand what your organization does overall as a bigger picture. And it does help organization overall problem solving in your organization, because we don't go to work to just say let's do what we do same day every day. We look to make it better, and part of process improvement is problem solving. We want to make things better. Well, it may not be called a problem, but it might become a problem if we don't look at it now. Right. So we want to support standardization, and one of the biggest standardized things I've used as I was growing up was the Dewey Decimal System. And those of us who grew up in the 70s and 80s, when we went to the library, we didn't have Google, we didn't even have computers for the most part. But Dewey Decimal System was our bread and butter. It was categorized. We knew if we had to go into a section that I would go to a librarian. I tell you, librarians are the best knowledge managers because they have order built into them, and they have order built into what they're doing. So it helps them to locate stuff, and having findability is important. So it can be used. Standardization supports everything we do. Whether we want to or not, want to realize it or not. But you can find standardization in process implementation, or when we build standard work items. Even though I work in a job where I don't have a standard work item, I have requirements I have to meet, and I have a standard way of doing it. So, if I ever get promoted in this job, I'm going to have a plan in place to be able to pass down the right knowledge to my relief, and that is going to be set. It's going to be a standard way. Okay, so I do daily, so I do weekly, so I do monthly. These are the customer requirements. So think standardization. When you think of it, think of do a decimal system. If you're trying to describe it to somebody, because it's probably the um, most easily understood to people who go in libraries a lot. When you're online, it's easy to Google search, but you know, finding a book in a bookstore, now they're categorized, but they don't necessarily use Dewey Decimal System, so it's all good. Right. So this is what I wanted you to take away from it. Just know that in knowledge management, again, it's all about the information you have and knowing what to do with it. How it affects what you're doing, how it can improve your processes, how it can make knowledge sharing easier, how you can make things better. But there's nothing special about the methods. You're using methods that were already used in project management or used in process improvement and continuous improvement. Just knowing those is going to save you so much time. No, again, there's no standalone processes. So if you say knowledge management is special, I say it's special just because it's knowledge management, but it's not special as in how you do business. You just got to be open to sharing knowledge, letting your team know what's going on, being able to transfer it and to capture it, find it. That's really what's big. And then managing knowledge is critical. It's critical of supporting the change, standardization, and procedural compliance, because that's pretty important when it comes to making sure you're in line with the legal requirements, as well as safety. So knowledge management, I think I see it everywhere. I can't get away from it, and I love it, and I hope you love it too. um, that's all I really have for you. I really enjoyed sharing this with you, and as you can tell, I do love knowledge management, Starbucks, and just about everything about mind mapping. Thank you.
Well, Cindy, thank you. And we'll encourage people to continue submitting questions. You can see Cindy's contact information. That'll be back up on screen in a slightly different form, managing the knowledge of how to find and reach Cindy. That QR code that goes to her LinkedIn profile will also be up on the final Q&A screen. But before we go into Q&A, just want to make a few quick announcements. If you can, next slide. Upcoming webinars. These are a monthly series. Next webinar is going to be a shift from knowledge management to knowledge workers. And in some ways, we're all knowledge workers these days, but the presentation is going to be titled Lean for Knowledge Workers, March 9th, presented by Kim Mascarda. Now, regular attendees will want to note there's a special time here. Instead of 1 p.m. Eastern, which is our typical standard time, this webinar is going to be at 11 a.m. Eastern, because Kim will be joining us from Australia, where I believe it will be midnight his time. So midnight better than 2 a.m. For Kim. So we'll look forward to that webinar. You can register for it today. If you go to kinexus.com/webinar, scroll down a little bit past the information about Cindy's webinar today. We'll also invite you to check out the webinar on demand library. And you can find that at the same page, kinexus.com/webinars. There's a link to that. That's okay. All right, next slide, please. We have a blog. We actually have two blogs. If you go to blog.kinexus.com, if you click on the header, there's what we call the improvement blog, which is on themes related to improvement, and anybody and everybody is welcome to read. There's also a tab that is what we call the customer blog, which is more about new KaiNexus software features and announcements and things like that. You're free to read it. It might not mean as much to you if you're not a customer, but check those out. And the most recent blog post on there, really good post by a new KaiNexus team member, Austin Lim, who kind of turned this phrase, don't ask me, that's not my job. He kind of turns that upside down. It's a really clever, thought-provoking post on the role of leaders. So again, go to blog.kinexus.com for that. Next slide. We have a podcast. You can find that at kinexus.com/podcast. You can find us in all the major apps, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Overcast, which is the favorite podcast app of our CEO, Greg Jacobson. I've been using Overcast a lot recently. His pro tip is you can listen to podcasts at like 1.5x speed if you want. Your brain can absorb that flow of knowledge. The audio from today's webinar will be available in the podcast feed as well later today if you want to revisit this or share the audio with people. The video recording will also be available, of course, on our YouTube channel as well. And if you can advance it. Okay, so here we go. Q&A slide. Cindy's email address, web address, QR code to go over to LinkedIn. And with that, we've got a good amount of time for questions and discussion and conversation. So again, please submit those questions via the Q&A box, not the chat. People are following that standard well. A couple of thank yous in the chat. So we've got a couple questions on gamification, Cindy. First, we have a question here. How can you gamify your hospital's process to prepare teams for accreditation? I don't know. Have you had a chance to work in healthcare, Cindy? I don't know if this is.
I have not, but if I had to think about it, I would probably look and see, based on progress of somebody working through certifications, if they can deliver a training to a team, give them points based on how they trained a team and maybe award them. I don't know if it's not cheesy to say, hey, buy a stethoscope to whoever did the best training throughout the time period.
Right. Well, it's to clarify, it's not certification, it's accreditation. So let's say the Joint Commission, or this would be very similar. Let me ask the question this way. Think of it as like an ISO 9000 accreditation visit. Do you have thoughts on how you could try to gamify that?
I think I would just look and see, break it down into parts and see if we can all achieve, something simple like when we compete for business. I know it sounds, simple, but we usually do like a pizza party or something with food at the end of it. Hey, if we can achieve accreditation by this time, or with this amount of I don't know what to call them, not marks or whatever, where they say that these are areas you need to improve upon.
Sure. Deficiencies.
Yeah, that's it. That's a deficiency. So if you have no deficiencies, we're going to do this, or they may even want to gamify it with a bonus, a monetary bonus to the team.
And if anyone in the audience works in healthcare and has thoughts about gamifying accreditation preparation, you can put something in the chat about that as well. Another question, just more generally about gamification, Cindy. Are there times or situations you can think of where gamification might backfire?
I think it backfires if you need a team to do something and you have it individually and they are holding back on knowledge that they have that will prevent something from going wrong. And I'm talking safety or anything. I'm talking about a process. If somebody has to do something and they forget to do a step, but somebody there knows that they're going to win or they're going to come out on top if somebody else doesn't do as well. But what they're doing is really affecting the whole team. So I think that that's nothing you should gamify.
Yeah, so we don't want to set up incentives or things that would somehow put individual rewards over what the team's trying to accomplish. Yeah, that's a really good point. Another question here, thinking back to earlier in your presentation when you talked about different types of mapping. We had a question here about incorporating, or if you could elaborate, these different types of mapping and PDCA cycles. Are they similar concept? Are there differences? How would those types of maps fit into PDCA cycles?
Well, I'm going to use my favorite one, which is my mapping, and talk about PDCA. So planning, for mapping, I want to. So I'm going to use this for business development. I'm going to want to say that, hey, I want to come up with ideas of who the best person is to contact out of this. So I'm gonna go through my due diligence and talk to people and research online, figure out who's experienced with this customer. And then from that, I'm gonna go and bounce things off of people. Say, hey, does this make sense? Is this person still there? Is this contract still available to people? And then once I'm good to go, I'm gonna write the proposal, which is act. And then when it comes back to me and says that whether or not I've won the contract, then that's starts the plan again. So I'm either going to plan to succeed next time because I failed, or I'm going to plan to win it recompete. So that's just how I see plan, do, check, act for mind mapping.
Okay, thanks, Cindy. There was a comment in the chat back to that other question about gamification and hospital accreditation. Suzanne commented or suggested you could create an internal deadline for accreditation and give points to each department who reaches the targets. You could give prizes to the top 3 departments to those. Yeah, I don't know your thoughts or reactions to that, Cindy.
No, I think that's good. Yeah, I think that's really good. As long as it doesn't negatively affect somebody, some other team by you achieving something, as long as no one's holding back something that helps the other team be successful as well.
Okay.
And as you can tell, I'm really big on the team concept here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's another question here, going back to lessons learned, and I had a question related to that too. So we're going to go back to the very beginning of the presentation,
Sure.
I think, about lessons learned. Stephanie says, I love the practice of reviewing lessons learned at the start of projects. Other than hoping that people do this, how do you standardize this into team practices?
Oh, I just make it a requirement. When I was on my ship, long time ago, like 15 years ago, I was on a ship, and I'd make it was a requirement for my teams every time we did a gun shoot. It was a requirement for them to get together and talk to other people about what they had happen with the gun and with the equipment. And the same thing when we pulled into a port, we were required by our XO and our CO to go into the database, because database was kind of iffy, whether or not have what we need, but we had to look and see what ports we were visiting in order to write up our report of how we were going to protect our sailors as we left the ship. So if you put it in your process as its requirement, then I don't see how that can be a bad thing. It doesn't take very long to go back and talk to people as well.
I could see building a prompt like that into, let's say, a Six Sigma project charter, or even an A3 template if you're using A3s to plan and track a project. I really like that idea. It's just more broadly of not only reviewing lessons learned from that project at the end of that project, but I love the idea of starting a project by reviewing lessons learned from other initiatives. That seems like that could be a very helpful practice.
Yeah, and something else is that as you're learning things, don't forget to talk to people while you're working your project too, because there can be somebody else working a very similar project as you are, and you could save them a lot of pain. You could save your company a lot of money and time if you share your stuff as you're going.
So yeah, to document those and to share those, and people who are using KaiNexus would be documenting things like that as they're working their A3s or their improvement projects that might be tracked in KaiNexus. One other question, going back to lessons learned, I was wondering if you could elaborate or give a little bit more detail around the difference between lessons learned and after action reviews. What I heard you say, and correct me if I was wrong, is that lessons learned discussion is for the team. After action review is more for reporting up the leadership chain. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, that's kind of how it's seen. But with knowledge management, when you're doing lessons learned, it's helping people to realize what deficiency you had, as well as what successes you had and how you achieved them. Whereas an after action review is more based on how much time did it take, and what did we do to maybe speed it up, or what happened to slow us down? What resources did we need? Did it work out like we planned when we did our kickoff? And then, just overall, what is the customer saying? Because sometimes in these after actions, you may do them with the customer or without the customer. And when you do them with the customer, you never know what they're going to say. So, just got to be able to take action from that too.
Yeah. Get the voice of the customer, and better yet, if you learn something new, rather than guessing what the customer thinks, go and ask them.
Yeah, and I always recommend briefing your senior chain of command before you talk to the customer. That way you're chain of command is not caught off guard.
So another question that came in here, Yvonne asks, says, timing is everything. Sometimes an idea fails because it's just not the right time. Revisiting old ideas can be valuable. Do you have a process idea for prompting that?
Um, I don't really have an idea for that, but if I had to come up with one right now, I would say just continually talk to your team, because sometimes the person, they're complaining all the time, you'll realize maybe their idea wasn't so bad. Maybe their idea was okay if you tweak a little bit, And when you get them to buy into it, they're more apt to talk to you more.
Mhm. And I'll add a couple thoughts here. I mean, one, I think in the lean practice of strategy deployment, or sometimes referred to as Hoshin Kanri, when you're looking at key initiatives and you're trying to prioritize and make sure you're not exceeding improvement capacity on those big initiatives, it's not just a matter of yes, no, approve, reject. You often have yes, no, not now as three broad categories. And you could track that on a Kanban board as an organization. You can track those in different ways. And I'll mention just one other use for KaiNexus is when we're evaluating a proposed improvement, there is literally a way of sort of closing it out for now and saying, it's just not a priority at this time. And then better yet, you can set a flag to automatically remind yourself after 3 months or after 6 months. And so there is a little bit of automation that people can use within KaiNexus. We had a comment in the chat from Stephanie. We've incorporated that into KaiNexus. So I think you mean the not now, the yes, no, not now. So maybe Stephanie will add another. Okay, she says yes. So it's a great use of that practice, and especially doing that in KaiNexus. Another question here from Michael. He asks, or he says, first, I'm planning an upcoming staff training on visual management. The focus would be on individual work boards or build your own Kanban, as you showed us. Are there other visual management tools, especially geared toward the individual, that you would recommend weaving in for just kind of general workplace audiences? Is Kanban enough, or what other visual management tools would you also use?
Well, I sometimes like to use knowledge maps, because you can categorize things, and then as you come up with the different ideas, you can do a little, not branches, but the lines, and add on your extra boxes. Instead of having a org chart, you could do it based on your workload. And so that helps people to be able to, because when people see things and they go check them off, they're more apt to look at that like, hey, look, I've done all this. And not only are they using it, but they're showing it to other people without saying, hey, look at me. They can have it posted, and that might encourage them to work more towards that, or to have conversations about, oh, well, I've done that before. I can, this is what I did.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Cindy. There's two questions related to software solutions or databases. I'll sort of try to combine it into a question. So the first person said, I would like to set up a knowledge management database within my company, a consulting firm. What should I take into account setting this up? I'm especially curious about setting quality standards and keeping the database up to date. And I'll add first before bouncing it over to you, Cindy. KaiNexus can be, not to belabor the point, but our software can be used for purposes like that if you don't want to build something per se. But I think it's a great question, even for current KaiNexus customers or people who are going to do their own things, Cindy. Quality standards, keeping the database up to date. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, first, if you're going to be using, like, I kind of joke that our SharePoint portal at work is a bunch of stuff people put there. They don't know where else to put it. So what I recommend is that, as far as knowledge management goes, is you put a date, have a date structure. And when I put dates on my documents, I always put, like today, I put 2022-02-10, if today's the 10th, which I think it is. So I always put that, and I put an underscore, and then I put, if it's my document, I put my name. If it's a project document, put the project name. And second thing is, you got to make it findable. So you have to have, whatever your documents are, they have to be findable to people. So understand what key search words they're going to use to find something if they don't know where to look. And third, you got to have somebody responsible for going through there and getting rid of the junk or getting rid of
Mm.
stuff that's outdated. You don't want to keep draft material there unless it's specifically marked as a draft area so people can go and check out documents. And that's another one too. Make sure you do a check-in, check-out process because otherwise you'll have several people work on the same document and then saving their changes over somebody else's. So you're going to want to go back and also clean it up every now and then. So with every database, you need to go in and decide, how recent are you going to look for documents, or are you going to look for versions and use a version number and a date number on your documents. But out of all that, I think findability is important, and people having access to it's important.
Yeah. So maybe one final question for you, Cindy, and this might serve as a bit of a preview of the podcast episode that we did together a couple weeks back in the Lean Blog Interviews podcast, and we'll share a link to that in the follow-up email. A lot of times people say things like, knowledge is power, and they want to hoard information. They think their value to the organization would be defined as, what they know. I'm the only one who knows it. People have to come to me. That gives me job security. But you've written, as we talked about in the episode, that knowledge sharing is actually good for your career. Can you kind of give us the synopsis of why that is?
Yeah, knowledge sharing is good because you don't come off as selfish. First of all, you don't want somebody on your team that's selfish and that is going to hold back what you need to succeed as a team. And your professional growth may be contingent on that. It's also important because people see you as promotable. They see you as being able to move up because you don't have all the knowledge of yourself. You haven't been selfish. You haven't kept it all and taught nobody else how to do your job, because one day you get hit by a bus or something can happen like COVID where you can't go to work.
Sure.
And you may not be able to use a computer to do your job. I can't use my computer to do my job 100% of the time because I work in a lab and I have to go to this lab and do all the work in there. So I have to have somebody else that knows what they're doing to be able to do that in my absence. So just know that. Oh, yeah, you got it. Knowledge sharing is so important. I hate knowledge hoarding. I think it's selfish and it really hurts the team in general.
Well, Cindy, thank you for your thoughts on that. And the full podcast episode, I'd put a link to it in the chat. I'll copy and paste that and put that in there again. So if you'd like to hear more of Cindy's thoughts related to that topic in a more conversational format, please do check out that podcast. And you can ignore the little bit of promo that we did for the webinar because you were here. So thank you to everybody who attended and stayed on here. Cindy, you really kept everyone's attention, looking at the measure of how many people stayed on through your presentation and into the Q&A. There are some thank yous coming in, and I want to amplify that. Cindy, thank you for presenting today. Thank you for sharing, and really appreciated it. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. I had so much fun. This is really a fun one.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for being on. And again, the next webinar, March 9th, Kim Muscarda. You can go and register for that now at kinexus.com/webinars.